Hi everyone, I'm Cyril Filias, the Program Learning and Development Specialist at CERC. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm coming to you live from Canada where it's Monday evening, so good evening to all our North American participants who are working late to watch this webinar with us. And of course, in Asia Pacific, it's Tuesday morning, so good morning everyone, and we are happy to deliver a webinar at a time that is convenient to you on the other side of the world. On behalf of all the CERC team, I also wanted to share our thoughts for all the career development community impacted everywhere in the world right now. We know that there is a lot of uncertainty, and we do appreciate you take the time to be together with close to 1,700 registrations from all over the globe, including in Australia and New Zealand. So thank you. Today, we are delighted to have John Wooden live with us from his beautiful Australia, who will talk more on his work adjustment theory published on the CERC book called Career Theories and Model at Work. But before John gets started, we would like to take a few moments to introduce you to CERC and share some housekeeping notes with you. CERC is a charitable organization that focuses on education and research in career counseling and career development in Canada. We fund the development of resources like the Career Theories and Model at Work book in order to advance knowledge in the field. And bringing you learning opportunities like this free webinar series is also a key part of our mandate. Additionally, CERC has three main programs. The careerwise.ca website, which features the top news and views in the field with a French version called orientation.ca, the Canadian Journal of Career Development, which is free to access, and the Canaccess National Career Development Conference held in Ottawa each January, and for which we recently launched the call for presenter for Canaccess 21. So you can learn more about all of the CERC work and resources at cerc.ca. And also, because the CERC is always keen to learn how we can best support the career development community, you will have a short survey at the end of today's webinar to share with us what your learning needs are right now. So thank you in advance for your answers. Now, some housekeeping notes for you. If during today's webinar you have any questions or any comment, please enter them in the question box you see on your screen. We'll have a Q&A session where John will address all of your questions at the end of the webinar. Now, due to high demand, your internet might get slow and you might temporarily experience technical issues during today's webinar. But if you do, be reassured that you will receive the recording of today's webinar along with a presentation slide a week after the webinar series ends. Now, I would like to thank Mary McMahon for being live with us today. Mary is one of the three co-editors of the Career Theories and Model at Work book. And without the tremendous work of our editors, Nancy authors, Roberta Note, and Mary, the book wouldn't have been brought to life. So we are delighted to have Mary with us to say a few words about the book and introduce our presenter. So over to you, Mary.
Thanks, Cyril, and thank you everyone for coming to this webinar. Like Cyril, I'd like to just acknowledge the difficult times that we and our clients are living in at the moment, and I hope that you're all safe and well. The genesis of this book, I think, comes from many decades in the field where there's been criticism of a gap between theory and practice. And in 2011, Roberta actually co-edited a special issue of the Journal of Employment Counselling where she got theorists to write briefly about their theories. And we thought that it was, the three of us thought that it was time to try to do something that would forge a connection between the theories and models that we know exist in the field, but also how to apply them to make them more relevant for practitioners. So we approached CERC, and we've been just absolutely thrilled with CERC's support for this project, because they not only took up the project, but they've just continued to support and promote it, and it's currently being translated into French. So that's a really exciting development. We thought at the beginning we might end up with about 30 chapters. for this book, and we ended up with 43 chapters. So that was an indication of how important it seemed to the theorists and the model developers to actually translate their work so that practitioners could understand and apply it easily. So we actually, it's a very international lineup in this book because we have authors from 4 different continents and 9 countries in this book. So it's really a very international effort, which was very pleasing to us. And each of the chapters addresses a different theory or model. And so that's what this webinar series is about. The chapter authors have been presenting on their chapters, and that's what John is going to do today. So it's my great pleasure to introduce John. As some of you may know, John is actually a Canadian who has moved to Australia. So in his presentation of theory of work adjustment today, John is possibly undergoing a great big work adjustment as we speak as a result of his move. But John is working in Australia as a lecturer in guidance and counselling and career development in the College of Arts, Society and Education at James Cook University in Townsville, Queensland, Australia. So even though we're both in the same state as with Canada, we're in a big country, so there's about 1,000 kilometres between John and I right at the moment. John has a Bachelor of Science Honours in Psychology from Mount Allison University in Canada, and a PhD in Educational Psychology and Counselling Psychology from the University of Calgary. And he's also a registered provisional psychologist with the College of Alberta Psychologists. So he's interested in understanding newcomers' experiences in educational institutions and the workforce. So he's having a little experience of that as we speak. And he's led studies that look at the experiences of international students and their accompanying partners when they make international transition. And in his clinical practice, he's supported clients with anxiety, depression and stress and general mental health and well-being. And he's worked in secondary and university counselling centres to support students and the campus community. So John brings a wealth of experience to this webinar. And what impressed me as an editor of this book about John's chapter is his ability to translate the theory of work adjustment into practice. The theory of work adjustment, as John will probably mention, is one of the most long-standing theories in our field, and it can be quite complex, and John's made it very accessible. So I think he's been able to understand it into something that's very understandable and something very practical. So I feel that you're in really good hands in this webinar. So over to you, John.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Mary. I appreciate your vote of confidence there. So yes, today we're going to be talking about the theory of work adjustment, and it's a pleasure to be meeting with you all. And essentially my goal through this webinar is to present these concepts and examples so that you can start thinking of ways to translate these ideas into your own context. But to get us started off, we're going to have a bit of a reflection and a poll activity. So what I'll get you to do is just to take a moment to think about career transitions, to think about your own career transitions. So you might reflect on how many positions or jobs, how many different positions and jobs you've held across fields and organizations throughout your lifetime. And then I'll get you just to add them together, just, a ballpark figure. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then I can see the poll is already up. And so you'll have 4 options. So just have a think on that, have a reflection, and then choose one of the 4 options that is closest to resembling where you're at. And then we'll just wait a moment or here two for the results to come in. Okay, so the results, I can see 1% had only one position or job. 26%, so just over a quarter, had more than one but less than 5 positions or jobs in their career so far. And more than 5 but less than 10 jobs was about 45%. And just over a quarter again had more than 10 positions. So what I'm hoping you can immediately see from your own reflection, but from the poll as well, is that you know, throughout our lives, it's very rare for anyone to hold one career, one position, or one job. And as practitioners and people with our own careers, you're probably well aware of that, and it's not surprising to you. Yet what I do find for both practitioners and clients is that we often hold this expectation that we need to be finding the one job for us, you know, that there's a right way of having a career. And when we're not living up to that expectation, when we see ourselves maybe moving into one direction and then it not being a fit and having to consider a different direction, it can sometimes feel like, for clients anyway, that we're not doing our career correctly or that we're failing in some way. And then that can lead to, you know, anxiety or feelings of self-doubt around the ability to make career transitions and decisions. So to take this a step further, the latest estimates are that workers will probably have on average around 15 positions in their lifetime. And researchers in the career development space have already identified that this is a key shift in the world of work. So, you know, when the career development field was initially starting, there maybe was less transitions happening, but now we know that that's simply not the case. And as we see things like the gig economy expand further, you know, with Uber or Uber Eats and things like that, I wouldn't be surprised if the average continues to climb. So what is clear then is that career transitions, whether they're from one position to a similar one, a promotion, changing organizations, fields, or even countries, as I did myself, they can be expected as part of the modern career. So then as career practitioners, part of our challenge is how do we effectively incorporate career transitions into our work with clients? So as Mary noted, although the theory of work adjustment is on the older side of career development theories, you know, it is still quite a highly researched theory, and it's in the same sort of genre of person, environment, fit category of theories that is similar to Holland's theory, for example. So just for the sake of me speaking here, I'm going to start to refer to the theory of work adjustment as TWA. Essentially what TWA does is it provides a different perspective on how to conceptualize career transitions. So it includes both the worker and the work environment, as well as their ongoing relationship with their respective influences that help determine whether someone takes a step to stay in a position, whether a workplace offers the position, whether they decide to keep the person in that position, sort of looks at how that is negotiated and determined. So by helping clients understand their career transitions through TWA, hopefully what you can do is provide a normalization of career transitions and help them feel better prepared to engage in what is you know, quite an expected process of having a career in the modern world. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of TWA, I just want to give you a brief overview of where we're going today. So first, I'm going to introduce a case study, and we're going to use that case study throughout the webinar to sort of bring the concepts to life. So as Mary noted, they can be quite complex in some ways. I think it's easier if you ground them in a concrete example than sort of thinking about them purely in an abstract way. After talking about the case study, we will then look at some specific aspects of TWA, how they apply to the case study. I'll briefly touch on some critiques of TWA just so you can make some considerations about including it in your practice or not. And I'll have some practice points or ideas that I might use in practice with a client. At the end of the webinar, I'll just point out a couple of different resources to help give you some ideas if you'd like to continue your learning, and then we will have time for questions. So please meet Ivan. Ivan is, we're going to look at Ivan's situation here. Ivan is a completely fake client. However, aspects of Ivan's experience are quite real. So I'd like to introduce Ivan. You are going to be coming from this as if you are a worker in an organization that provides career counseling to newcomers. So you're meeting Ivan for the first time. And what you learn about Ivan is that he's in his early 30s, and he tells you that for the past decade, he's been working as an engineer in the oil and gas field. So he originally started working as an engineer in a country in Eastern Europe where he was born. And then he was recruited to come to Canada during a boom in the economy in Calgary. So a year or so ago, he became a Canadian citizen, and he currently plans on staying in Canada for the foreseeable future, although he does want to keep his options open. So what's interesting about Ivan's situation is that there's recently been a sharp decline in the economy, particularly in oil and gas, and I think that's true today as well. Ivan anticipates that he may be laid off shortly. So he explains to you that although he knows this and has this, sort of anticipation of being laid off, he's only half-heartedly looking for another position in oil and gas because he started to feel a little bit disconnected to his position about a year ago. And he's of two minds. So on the one hand, he doesn't want to lose the momentum, that's his words, lose momentum in his career. And he appreciates the lifestyle this position affords. And it sort of aligns with his goal, which is to start a family in the next few years. This has recently come up for him. On the other hand, however, he doesn't want to rush into a similar position because he started working with a friend in a startup company, and part of him is interested in seeing where the startup might go. He's also in a position where he's doing all right financially for the time being and wants to take his time to seek advice, and that's why he's come to see you for your expert opinion. So now that we know about Ivan, let's think just a little bit, let's get an overview of TWA. So it is a trait and factor type theory, as I already noted. It's along the same lines as Frank Parsons' work and Holland's work, and it was created by Dawes and Lofquist. And what they wanted to do was go beyond a static career choice. So sort of part of the critique of Holland's theory and some trait and factor theories is that they sort of look almost in a static way. How do we match, a one-time match in some ways, a person to a work environment? And so what Dawes and Lofquist wanted to do was to see a dynamic process that occurs over time. So it's not just one time, but across the lifespan of career. So the central tenet or the central concept that sort of differentiates it is this idea of correspondence between the individual and the work environment in an ongoing negotiation. In a moment, we'll look at how exactly that might play out with Ivan. But what I do just want to note before we get into that is to keep in mind as we're talking about the concepts that, it is quite complex than other theories. There are lots of model styles and propositions. It does have a significant body of research. So, that complexity can help with nuance in conceptualization and ideas of moving forward with your clients. It can also be challenging in other ways, and I'll talk more about that later. But to know that there are some aspects of this theory that are highly researched and supported by the literature. So unfortunately, we won't have time in this webinar to cover every aspect of TWA, but what we will do is focus on the two main models so you get a sense of what it is. All right, so here is the first model. So I've just presented it to you as a whole, so you just take it in and just understand right off the bat, get a sense of that complexity that I was talking about. So you can see there are many different components and there are many different arrows going this way and that. So the first model we're going to talk about is called the predictive model, and it addresses the concept of correspondence or fit. It's probably the main idea that people know about if they know about TWA, and it's probably the aspect that's most researched and supported. So if we take a broad look at the model and we start on the left-hand side, notice that it has individual and job side by side. So immediately it should jump out to you that the model is focusing on the reciprocal relationship. So it's not just one or the other, but both are included. If we go one step removed from the individual, and look at their abilities. So abilities are what they can sort of bring to the job. Abilities include professional or academic and experience skills or interpersonal skills, essentially any of those acquired skills. The counterpart on the job perspective, the employer and work environment perspective, is ability requirements. So those are the specific requirements of ability that the employer is looking for in order to best fill the job that they have. If we flip it to the bottom, and again, starting at the individual, you can see that it has values. So values from the individual's perspective are a grouping of aspects that are important to the individual. And there are 6 main ones, according to Dawes and Lofquist. They are achievement, status, autonomy, safety, comfort, and altruism. The counterpart to values is the reinforcer pattern. So this is what the job is able to, or the work environment is able to offer the individual. And it could include things, the most obvious is sort of salary and benefits and things like that. But it could just be also, the pace of the work environment and other aspects such as that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to hone in on this area and try to see what it looks like applied to Ivan's situation. Let's start at the top. So we'll start on the right-hand side this time in the gray box next to ability requirements. These are just some examples of the abilities that the position, the work environment may have sought for an applicant that ultimately was Ivan. So they might include things such as engineering knowledge, competence to complete engineering work. And for this particular example, they were looking for somebody who was flexible to not work just in an office, but also to go and do some of the work in the field on site. If we think back to when Ivan was recruited for this position, he likely already had, an engineering degree that satisfied the requirement for the engineering knowledge. And he'd already probably worked at least a year in his country of origin and demonstrated some competence in the work. So, he had references and things like that that could speak to his abilities. At the time, this is a piece of information I'll add to our case example here. Ivan was okay. He was happy to not be in the office the whole time. He liked the idea of going to work in the field. So the work environment probably saw Ivan as a really good candidate for the position and was eager to have him on board. If we move to the bottom left-hand side now, so we're switching from abilities and ability requirements to values and reinforcer pattern. On the left-hand side, we can see that Ivan, he values, a paying position to support himself. So, he has things that he'd like to do, maybe go visit his family. He wants to have the financial resources to be able to do that. He also wanted things such as tasks that would challenge him. So he didn't just want to be doing the same things day after day. He wanted different sort of challenges and problems to think about. And in particular, he really wanted the freedom to do tasks without being overly micromanaged. On the employer side, they were keen to have Ivan, so they did create a competitive compensation package, salary and benefits that would be appealing to him. And they clearly indicated through the interview that the expectation would be that he'd be working independently, sort of taking problems as they come out in the field and addressing those. So as you can probably see from the examples here, there was more or less, the values and the ability or requirements were reciprocally met. And both the work environment and Ivan were likely to think of this as an ideal opportunity for the two. Okay. We're going to continue this example. We're going to expand the model a little bit here to make more sense of it. So from what we just discussed, we can probably reasonably assume that there was correspondence. So that's that fit aspect again. Both Ivan's abilities and the employer's ability requirements, as well as Ivan's values and the reinforcer pattern the employer was offering, fit each other. So we had that on both cases. So you can see that when you go from abilities and ability requirements, it goes to correspondence. Likewise, from values and reinforcement pattern, it goes to correspondence. So we need those two levels of correspondence, and they each have different names because of course they do. There has to be different terms for everything. So when there is correspondence between Ivan's values and the employer's reinforcement pattern, this means that the position has satisfaction to Ivan. So what Ivan is seeing is satisfactory. When there is a correspondence between the abilities and ability requirements, then this means that Ivan has satisfactoriness to the employer. You need to have the fit between the two in order for this predictive model to predict that not only will the work environment offer a position, but Ivan will accept it. And so you can see that interaction by the gold star I've indicated on the diagram. So that's where they sort of come in contact with each other. If there had not been correspondence, then the job may not have been offered or Ivan may not have accepted. If you look at the latter half of the diagram here of the model, you'll see that it doesn't end there. There's other considerations, if the ability requirements maintain satisfactoriness, then Ivan might be promoted or transferred or fired or retained. It sort of depends how that goes. But the key concept there is sort of in the middle, and it's tenure. So it's not just that correspondence happens once and then it's done and over. It has to be maintained, and it has to be maintained on both ends. So again, you see this reciprocal positioning of both the individual and the work environment. And that's the key focus here, that it's ongoing and the focus on the two. So assuming that correspondence is met, there will be tenure. Tenure meaning that the position will continue to be available and Ivan will continue to stay in the new position. If there is not correspondence, then Ivan might be out of a job or he might be looking for a new job himself, depending on how he wants to address that discorrespondence. All right, here we are at our second poll activity. This is going to help us look at Ivan's case a little bit closer here. So just take a moment and think about the information in the case study, and then answer the following question in the poll. How might you conceptualize the correspondence in this moment, so when you're meeting Ivan, and his employer? So in the poll, you're going to have four options. So just have a think about that, thinking about the correspondence. Where are they at right now? So we talked about where they were when they first recruited Ivan and Ivan accepted, but where are they at right now? We'll just wait a moment here while people answer the poll. This is a great way to start taking this on actively yourself and thinking about how you can apply it. Okay, we have the results. So 38%, this is the highest percent, say that Ivan and the employer are both maintaining correspondence. Okay. 16, Ivan is not maintaining satisfactoriness, the employer is not maintaining satisfaction, and about 30% say neither are maintaining correspondence. Okay, this is a bit of a tricky question. My perspective would be that more or less, it's Ivan and the employer who are both maintaining correspondence in this moment. So what I mean by that is Ivan still has tenure. There's still tenure being offered by the work environment for now. So if you were one of the other options there, you're probably picking up on and starting to think about different ways of how this could play out in the near future. So as Ivan hasn't quit and he's not been laid off, emphasis on the yet for both, probably the best conceptualization is that they are both maintaining correspondence. The important idea here is to start to think about what's going on with the correspondence and what might be a threat to it. Okay, we're going to expand a little bit here. So within the predictive model, there's this idea of personality styles. These styles help us to understand how people engage in their work environment through the predictive model. So there are 4 personality styles that we'll talk about here. And just a note on that, I'm going to be talking about them from the perspective of Ivan, because that's who we're working with here today. But you could apply these personality styles to the work environment. So similar to Holland's theory, how you match individuals' personality with the personality style of the work environment, you could do that here, have that exploration using the theory of work adjustment instead of Holland's theory. Okay, so the first concept we'll talk about is celerity. So celerity is the speed at which an individual interacts with the workforce, with the work environment, sorry, and it's either high or low. I'll go through what this looks like with Ivan so you get a better example of it in a moment here, but I'll first just describe them. Pace is the intensity with which an individual interacts with the workforce, high or low as well. Rhythm is the pattern of pace. So there's not just one pace. It can be, steady, pretty consistent. It can be cyclical, sort of alternating, or it can be erratic, no discernible pattern. And endurance is the degree to which an individual sustains interaction with the work environment. Again, it can be high or low. So through your session with Ivan, you sort of come to understand that he has high celerity. So he almost immediately starts to attend to projects when they're assigned to his workload. He interacts quite quickly then. You find out he has a bit of low pace, so he takes challenges in stride. He doesn't really need to pour a lot of energy into them right away. He sort of can just take them as part of his regular routine. He does, however, have a cyclical rhythm though. So that means Ivan switches pace. So usually he sort of takes it easy, steady as he goes, but if there's a deadline, he can amp up that energy. And finally, what's interesting is that he has high endurance. So he does not get impatient with long-term projects, and he can sort of sustain that effort into a project for a long period of time without necessarily needing to see a finished product. So what I will point out about the personality styles is that they can be quite interesting to deepen your conceptualization as well as the client's understanding and maybe see how that's playing out in the work environment and if that is maybe affecting correspondence in some ways. However, these can be quite challenging to talk about. Celerity is not a commonly known term, so you have to explain that first and then apply it to the client situation. It's also less researched than the predictive model that we just explained, we just went over. So just to keep that in mind as you move forward. Okay, with the predictive model done, we're going to shift into the process model. And at the same time, we're going to talk about a different kind of style. These are adjustment styles. So you're probably already seeing that TWA has a lot of different components and concepts going on, and it might be a bit challenging to keep it all straight in your head. So the process model helps us to understand how individuals engage in adjustment and when there is dissatisfaction. So dissatisfaction is the opposite of satisfaction, which we talked about as being one of the key concepts of TWA. So satisfaction motivates individuals to maintain correspondence, and dissatisfaction motivates people to address any discorrespondence. This diagram is a bit more complex, so I'll walk you through it. If you look at the very bottom, the lowest dotted line of the diagram, that represents the point at which someone starts to feel dissatisfied with their work environment. If you think about Ivan when he first started, so before he came to see you, Ivan likely did not feel much dissatisfaction. So he was probably below that dotted line, that lowest dotted line. When he came to you, he was likely starting to feel some dissatisfaction. So you could see I've positioned him here in the first row, in that first bottom area. So this bottom area is where people are aware of the reduction in satisfaction. So they might be contemplation or pre-contemplation, if you want to think about it in a different way. In this bottom area, they are able to tolerate some discrepancy. They usually don't need to do much. They don't need to act in any ways to change that discrepancy. This is a concept in TWA called flexibility. So when you're flexible, you can bend or shift depending on how things change around you or within you, and you don't necessarily need to move or make any big changes. That's going to be important when I talk about another concept coming up here in a moment. So for Ivan, he's likely started to find the tasks at work a little repetitive, and because he's worked there for a couple of years, and he might sense that financial security that really drew him to the position in the first place could soon be gone, and so that's increasing his dissatisfaction. But he's only started to think about it. He hasn't made any changes yet, other than coming to see you. All right, so you've noticed that Ivan has moved up to the second row here. If dissatisfaction continues, Ivan may exceed his level of flexibility. So nothing is completely flexible, all the time. There's limits to flexibility. So let's say, for example, that Ivan's company offers in the recession, in the downturn in the economy, they offer a reduced salary. So instead of laying people off, they decide to cut people's salary by 10%, 15% across the board. If Ivan's level of flexibility is exceeded, then he has, according to TWA, two options. The first option is he can decide to change himself. Changing yourself, that's called reactive adjustment. So we've got flexibility and then reactive adjustment. For example, in reactive adjustment, he might take a look at his budget, see if he can revise it. He might also try to prioritize his workload and his work priorities as less to help him accommodate having a lower salary. If he doesn't want to do that, or that's not enough, his other option, according to TWA, is active adjustment. And this is where you make a change or try to make a change on the work environment. So for Ivan, for example, what he might do is propose to his work that he works 4 days a week instead of 5 days on the reduced salary. So if he's only working 4 days, but he's making less money, at least he has that time back. And so that might help bring up one of his other values and bring him back into that flexible range. And now we see Ivan is in the top row here. So if Ivan continues to act on himself and the environment, he'll do that until he can no longer stand it. And that's different for each person. So the tolerance to a mismatch is called perseverance. So at the bottom row, we had flexibility. That's where little change is needed. And perseverance is where we're able to stick with making changes. But there comes a point at which everybody sort of says enough is enough and decides to let it go, move on, do something different. For example, Ivan's employer, let's just say, denies his request for the ability to work 4 days a week. And after a couple of months of adjusting his budget, Ivan still feels overworked, undercompensated, dissatisfied, basically. At this point, his level of perseverance is surpassed, and he may move to this top row. So the way people respond to discorrespondence through these adjustment styles is developed over time and through their experience. And I think there's a good way of thinking about this in your own life to make it a little bit closer to home, is that, think about the people you know or about yourself. We all know someone who, they get into a job or a position and they immediately tell you that they're thinking about leaving it, and they usually do and move on to something else. And it seems like they've just gotten in there and you're not really sure why they're already thinking of leaving. So that person might have lower perseverance, for example. Alternatively, on the flip side, you might have that person in your life that just seems to stick with that position despite what sounds like, a truly horrible work environment, and yet they stay there for quite a long time. Bringing it back to Ivan, he might decide at this point that he wants to wholeheartedly move into the startup venture with his friends. It's just not worth it with what he's being paid. So those are the main concepts that we have time to look at today. I'm going to briefly cover some critiques. I've already hinted at some of these, so I won't go into too much detail with them. This is just to help you conceptualize, where it might be appropriate or inappropriate to use with your own clients. So the first one I'll talk about is, a unique feature of TWA is that it does focus on the relationship between individuals and their work environments. However, ultimately, as you probably saw through some of the examples that we worked through today, it's typically the client that we have in front of us. So although it's the relationship that's really the main consideration, we only have one partner of the relationship. So it's just important to keep in mind, how can we continuously recenter the relationship rather than sort of going what's easily accessible to us, which is the client. Another critique is that, as I've already noted, it's quite complex. So we only reviewed 2 models. There are, many propositions and corollaries that we could have talked about, that provide additional information through TWA. Simply didn't have enough time. And that can be quite challenging in the context of a session with the client to also explain all these different terms and keep them in a coherent plan with the client. Third critique is that TWA doesn't explicitly address diversity. It's more passive position on that. So because it is so individually focused, with looking at the individual's experience there, it assumes or hopes that through that exploration of the individual, their values and needs, that diversity considerations are taken into account. However, what we know is that there are real structural and systemic barriers within our society, and these do need to be addressed explicitly for appropriate career counseling. So those are just a couple of critiques, by no means comprehensive. What I want to switch to now is talking about some practice points. So how might I take this conceptualization that we've been working on and put it into practice? So I'm going to focus on just a couple of here. I am focusing on Ivan because that's who we're working with, but it could be interesting to see how this plays out on the work environment side of things as well. So the first is the, know the requirements. So you want to tailor and help clients do this, tailor representation of their abilities to correspond with the ability requirements for the work environment. So for Ivan, you might explore what are the abilities that his employer is still in need of despite there being an economic downturn. Are there any avenues here for him to highlight other experience he's had that can address these needed skills, or is there a plan that he could pursue to gain these skills to make his tenure last? That's the first one. A second idea is to keep in mind that rewards count. Clients are sometimes surprised by the unexpected needs or values that when they get into a work environment they didn't know they needed, but for whatever reason aren't there, and create discorrespondence. So it can be helpful to explore this. And in Ivan's case, you might want to hone in on the idea that his values and needs have changed from when he originally accepted the position. So when he first started, family wasn't one of his central sort of priorities. It was a little bit more peripheral down the road. Now it's taken more central stage. So things have changed for him, and I would have a curiosity around how that has changed this discorrespondence. So linked to that one is helping clients develop the lifelong skill of noticing changes. So again, recentering this reciprocal relationship here, helping the client in some ways take notice of not only themselves, so through the counseling, develop the strategies of noticing not only themselves and what's changed, but also what might be changing in the work environments. In the context of a booming economy versus an economic slowdown, work environments have very different ability requirements that they need. Paying attention to these changes helps you to address that ongoing consideration of correspondence. So for Ivan, this might mean, taking strategies from the sessions where he can maybe, let's say he decides to stay at his current position for the time being, but thinks he might want to reconsider in the future. He'll have the skills to reconsider that himself at a later time. And finally, layering the theories. So one of the critiques was that it may not cover diversity, for example. So what you could do with Ivan is you could layer in a diversity model, and then that could help you bring, for example, a culture-infused look into how he's maybe internalized societal or cultural ideas around prioritizing financial certainty over potentially more creative works. So by no means is that an exhaustive list of practice points, but I hope it's a starting point for you to see how you might use TWA to help your clients navigate the career transition process and normalize that this is a process that happens. So I'm just going to summarize here a little bit as we're towards the end. So to recap, TWA can be used to help facilitate an understanding of career development that includes the relationship, so between individuals and the environment, and it can help to contextualize career transitions as normative and reframe struggles with transitions as a process that you can prepare someone for. Okay, so you've just spent almost the last hour learning about TWA, and I'm hoping that there were some aspects that stood out to you as potentially helpful in your work. But before we speed off to the next thing, just invite you to take a quick moment, think about maybe one concept or one aspect from the webinar that you'd like to continue to consider. So maybe not even take on board yet, but maybe you're curious about finding out more. So just take a moment and have a think about that. So easy to learn something and then to actively go on to the next thing. If you're interested in learning more, I'll just highlight 3 quick resources. First is the book, the Career Theories and Models at Work from CERC. I have a chapter in there on this. It'll provide additional ideas as well as a summary of this webinar, and it goes through another case study and how I might conceptualize it. If you're looking for a different kind of take of this same theory with different perspectives of how someone might take up these concepts in practice, another textbook that can be helpful is the Career Theory in Practice one in the middle there. And then finally, the University of Minnesota Vocational Psychology Research page. That's the institute where Dawes and Lofquist sort of did the main work. They have a dedicated section that has ideas and can point you towards assessments related to this theory to use in your practice. So those will be available in the handouts that you'll get next week. And that concludes our exploration of TWA. We do have some time for questions, and I'm happy to try to answer them. Okay, so the first question is, can you use this theory for recruitment? How would you apply it in the early stages of a candidate seeking and matching? Oh, okay, interesting. So I don't do much work looking at recruitment necessarily, so I don't know if I can provide a very thorough answer on that. But what I would start to think about in the early stages of a candidate seeking and matching, so I'm making an assumption here, that this is coming from the work environment perspective. Hopefully I'm on the right track with that. Being really clear. So, sometimes it seems like busy work coming up with the ability requirements, for example, the list of aspects that you need to cover in the job, but being really clear. So same as we would do that exploration with clients to clarify what they need for there to be a good match, doing that on your end. So from a recruiter's perspective, helping the work environment clarify exactly what it is that they're looking for. What that does then is it provides the opportunity for ideal candidates to see is this truly a fit for me? So up front, there is more transparency, and there's ability for there to be a clear correspondence between the two. So again, sorry, I'm not in the recruitment sort of area, either research or practice, so I can't expand on that too much, but hopefully that gives you a starting point to think about there. Okay, the next question is it recommended to inform clients of this theory? So I think that I mean, I would check your ethical standards to whatever body you're working with. Some ethical bodies think that you should be quite clear and transparent, maybe in the consent before you start working with clients about the types of models and theories they might expect. And then another part of that for some people is their personal preference. So some people prefer to, yes, to be completely transparent and bring the client on board. That's my personal style. I like to be very collaborative. So I would actually, particularly if I'm going to give some education around the different concepts, I would really want them to understand why I'm asking these. Why am I using this time, this valuable time we have together to look at these different things, so that you have a full understanding of why I'm doing that and the research that supports me doing that. So the question is, what resources are available to help support clients in developing competence to notice change and adjustment strategies? I can't think of any one resource off the top of my head. When I was conceptualizing that practice point from my own end in practice is sort of circling back to the transparency point of the last question. I try to demystify what I'm doing with clients. So I explain, why am I leading them or, facilitating, sort of guiding them in this particular process, and how they might take up this process themselves. Maybe if I get the chance to work with somebody ongoing, that seems to be less and less the case these days, as it's more brief style sessions. But if I get the chance to work with someone ongoing, or maybe work with them for a short period and then they return, slowly shifting who has the autonomy, who is guiding the session, so they can start practicing taking that up themselves with my support. So no, I'm sorry, I don't have one concrete resource to point you to. That would be great though. So am I aware of practitioners who are using personality styles from TWA, and if so, how? I don't know of people who are using TWA. I do find, people, they know of Holland, they know Super, they might know Civicus as well. They don't tend to know TWA quite as well, but when I use it, essentially I do use it in a similar fashion that I would use if I was to bring in Holland's theory. So that is, sort of more one-on-one matching in some ways. So for example, if you're somebody who likes to have a steady workforce, talking to someone about how nursing, for example, might not align with that. The work environment and personality for the nursing environment is sort of different to that. So that's how I might take it up. Okay, I have time for one more question. So the question is, how would this model work with a client who's had multiple jobs? I can see it getting very complicated. Absolutely. And so I'm going to lend you some of my enthusiasm here for TWA. Yeah, it's going to be quite complicated. I think TWA is quite complicated anyway. And so what's sort of exciting about that with a client who's had these multiple jobs, like let's say 10 or more, you're going to have a lot of examples to work with. You're going to have a depth of richness to really explore and really accentuate What are those values? What are those needs the client has? And what have they learned from all those different experiences? What is the process that they have seen unfold? Does this process play out in their own experience? So that's how I might take it out. So I can see there are other questions and I would love to get to them, but unfortunately there's not enough time today, so I'm going to pass it back over to Cyril now.
Thank you, John. And yes, you're right. It was really great to see all those questions coming through the webinar. So thank you all for your great engagement tonight. John, thank you. Thank you for your presentation today. It was interesting to learn more about the theory of work adjustment and to get a practical case study and how to use it with our clients. So thank you for having shared your knowledge with us today.
My pleasure.
Now, let me share a few information for you all. If you wish, you can learn more about the Career Theories and Model at Work book, including how you can get your own copy at cerc.ca/theories. But our webinar series continues with our two Francophone authors, Simon Vivier and Louis Cornoyer, who will be presenting their webinars on April 24 and April 27, followed by our last webinar on May 1st, presented by David Blusting from the US. And as I mentioned earlier, the recording of today's webinar will be sent to you a week after the webinar series ends. So thank you in advance for your patience. In the meantime, you can still join our webinar series called the Career Development Professionals Guide to Effectively Serving Clients Living in the Autism Spectrum, presented by Sarah Taylor and in partnership with CASE, the Canadian Association for Supported Employment. But for now, don't forget to take a few minutes to share your feedback and learning need with us. And let me close by thanking you once again, John, as well as all the participants for being with us today. Have a great rest of the evening here in Canada and great rest of the day in Australia. We hope to see you soon.